our esteemed speaker, Dr. Stanley Krippner, who will now present his talk on the transformative power of ayahuasca. Professor Stanley Krippner is a pioneer in the study of consciousness, emphasizing cross-cultural perspectives and non-ordinary experiences that question mainstream paradigms. He is a prolific author and researcher on dreaming, psychedelics, creativity, shamanism, parapsychology, and trauma, and a recipient of numerous awards in multidisciplinary fields. He has received Lifetime Achievement Awards from the International Association on the Study of Dreams, the Society for Humanistic Psychology and Parapsychological Association. Dr. Krippner is a fellow in 5 APA divisions and past president of 2. He is affiliated distinguished faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies and a fellow of the Institute of Neotic Science. So now, Dr. Krippner, I am going to make you the host so that you can share your PowerPoint and you can start with your presentation. If you need any assistance,
yes, I hear you very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, for gracing us with your presence.
Well, that was an incredible introduction. I think I should just retire because I cannot possibly live up to that. Nonetheless, we will give it a try. So this is a very special event that you're all attending, and I hope it proves valuable to you. And nowadays, when one talks about enlightenment, one thinks of different ways to be enlightened. Of course, there are numerous ways to have a broader view and a deeper view of the world that we live in. That's what I consider being enlightened. And this is something that's not new. This quest goes back to the dawn of humankind. And one of the ways that people sought enlightenment and understanding was through altering their consciousness. And this was done by meditation, how the body experiences, special diets, working within the dream, and of course, dancing, physical movement, martial arts, what have you. And then, of course, drugs of one sort or another. Ayahuasca has received a great deal of publicity in recent years, and so my remarks are going to focus on that. All right, so I'm looking for the first PowerPoint. Jean!
Yes.
Where's the first PowerPoint?
She'll have to put it up on screen.
Didn't hear you.
She'll have to put it up on screen.
Hi, Jean. So I made Dr. Krippner the co-host, and he can share the PowerPoint from his screen now. Could you please help him to do so?
I don't know how to do that, and he doesn't either.
Okay, so
the producer usually has it up, and then he just reads through it.
Could you please email me the right PowerPoint, and I'm going to share it on the screen? We can all take a minute just to send me the right PowerPoint so that I can share it on the screen real quick.
I printed out the wrong PowerPoint.
It's okay.
It's all right. You can send me the right one again, and we can just, it's very easy. I'll be more than happy to
Hold
help.
on 1 second. She's asked me to send it again. Let me get my phone.
Oh my.
Tell her I'm finding the email to send it again.
Ah. I feel like I've been abandoned.
Oh, no, I'm right here with you, Dr. Krippner.
I do
right.
not see. I do not see a PowerPoint.
Do you know where you saved it though?
Just emailed it right before the session.
Well, I can.
Is it on your
Okay.
screen anywhere, Stanley?
I can retrieve the PowerPoint, of course.
Okay.
Oh, God, this is embarrassing.
No, you're fine. This is fine. It's just a technical glitch and we can
See,
work.
I cannot even open the.
So, Dr. Krippner, then can I ask you to
Where
stop?
is the?
Let her resolve it on her end, Stan.
Okay, so can I ask you to stop sharing your screen?
Let her resolve it on her end.
Jean, can I ask you to stop sharing Dr. Krippner's screen so that I can see if
Okay,
I'm
do a stop.
using
Stop.
it?
Where can you stop sharing your screen? Click right there.
What?
Click that button right there. This. Stop share. Okay.
Okay, wonderful. There we are. There we are. So I am going to take a minute to look through and locate the PowerPoint. And I'm going to share it so that you can begin your presentation.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, this is not a problem at all. I mean, it's technology. It is only great when it works. And we're working through it together. So this is going to be fine. No worries. So I'm looking through it and I'll have it very soon and I'll be sharing it with you.
Here we go. He sent it at 1:17. I'll resend it.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh, nope, that was the shaman one.
Yeah, I got the shaman one. So
I can do any. Just put anything on it. I can use anything you put on.
I got Jean's message. Okay, so Jean, the one that the email that you just sent me does not have an attachment. I just have the shaman's PowerPoint.
Oh,
I can use that if you don't have the other one.
I see the
That's fine.
attachment. I see the attachment on my.
Just put something on.
Alternatively, is your ayahuasca thing on your desktop? Is it possible to share the ayahuasca PowerPoint on your screen? Do you know how to do that?
I don't know how to do that.
Oh, okay.
I watch a PowerPoint. Any PowerPoint will do.
Okay,
Let's
so
just
I
get
have the
going.
shamans, the first
Let's just get
scientific
going.
investigators.
Okay.
Can I share that then?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Okay, thank you for your patience, everyone. So I'm going to share Dr. Krippner's slide right now so that he can begin the presentation.
Okay, folks, we are making a little shift, and we're talking about shamans. And they were the first engineers of enlightenment. Okay, next slide. So we need a good definition of shamans because there's so many shamans around, and most of them in indigenous communities don't even use the word shaman, they use a different term. But what do all of them have in common? They're socially sanctioned practitioners who voluntarily regulate their attention to access information not ordinarily available, using it to facilitate healthy development and alleviate stress and illness among members of their community and the community of the whole. No, there's a lot in that. Let's just unpack that a little bit. Shamans are all called in one way or another. They're called in dreams, they're called by a serious illness, they're called by heredity, but the community has to endorse them and say, yes, we want you to serve our community. And the call is something that shamans typically don't go running at, happens to them. Being a shaman is no bed of roses, it's hard work. And if your abilities as a shaman peter out, you might even be exiled by your community. So there is no shaman without a community. Many people running around doing workshops call themselves shamans, but I say, where is your community? They might be doing very good work, but you can't call it shamanism. So when we say that they're voluntarily regulating their attention, we mean that they're able to alter their consciousness in one way or another. We talked about dreaming a moment ago. Well, in lucid dreaming, the shaman is in control of the dreams and can use dreams to access power for the community. And again, the shaman works on behalf of the community and its members. They don't work on a voluntary basis. They have to be approved by members of the community. Okay, let's have the next slide. So we talked about the call just a moment ago, and in shamanism, a call may take one of several forms: a serious illness, hereditary legacy, a dream, vision, or a visitation. One very famous shaman in Brazil, my Menina de Gantoy, who I interviewed, and her daughter, who's also a shaman, both said, when the spirits come knocking at your door, you've got to let them in. In other words, you don't dare turn down the call to shamanize, even though you know it's going to be hard work. If you turn it down, woe be unto you. Any number of unfortunate things might happen. So then the shaman undergoes some sort of training from an older shaman, from maybe their dreams, maybe from a spirit guide, And next slide. So the shaman common themes in their training include, first of all, death and rebirth. Sometimes a part of them has to die and be reborn for them to continue their work. Some shamans actually have visions of themselves dying, even being torn apart by animals, and then putting themselves together again in a much better way. And then shamans also assist transitions. The typical word for this in English is called a psychopomp. So they officiate at baptism, what we call baptisms, weddings, funerals, etc. There are various rites of passage in the tribes, and the shaman is usually the one who assists the transition. And then, of course, care of the soul. One common ailment is soul loss. For a member of the tribe, figuratively speaking, loses his or her soul. And the shaman might do a diagnosis of the illness and say, well, the reason you're sick is because somebody's captured your soul. So I'll have to go and retrieve it. And this is not an easy thing to do. And the shaman is usually successful, but not always. When they're successful, they return the soul to the client, and then the client follows instructions not to lose the soul again. But there's also soul retrieval, where a malevolent practitioner who has very, very strong powers, such as a sorcerer or a wizard, might somebody's soul. And again, the shaman has to sometimes negotiate to get the soul back. It's like the soul is being held for ransom. And sometimes you have to fight to get the soul back. I have had the opportunity to work with Rolling Thunder, a Native American medicine man. And one time when he was retrieving a soul,
Who's calling?
The people who were watching saw him fighting with a imaginary entity over the body of the person who was ailing, and they fought very hard, and people claimed that actually it smelled terrible odors in the room. And then the poor doctor who had his soul stolen woke up. He didn't remember a thing that he had done over the past few weeks, although people in his community knew that he was ailing in one way or another. So sometimes shamans will work with Western practitioners, of course. There's a lot of interchange possible. And then the shaman can also help prepare a person for the afterlife and even help with the transition. And it doesn't stop there. Many tribes believe in reincarnation, and the shaman can figure out what a person's past life was and how those lessons can help them in their current life. And this, of course, transitions is one of many, many functions of the shaman. Now, how do shamans access non-ordinary reality? Just think of the letter D. Pardon me. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, through drumming, through dancing, through dreaming, through drugs, through diets, deprivation. By deprivation, they might go off into the woods or mountain or meadow and fast and take no sustenance for several days, and then they are able to get the message that their community needs. Next slide. Now, shamanic states of consciousness can involve many, many things. Dreams, as we mentioned before, visions, intuitions, feelings, close observations of the natural and social world. The shaman is very well prepared to notice interactions between people, especially if there's a family dispute, and be the mediator. The shaman also notices changes in the natural world. The hunters and gatherers often have to move from one place to another to find game, to find food, and that's why they're called hunters-gatherers. And the shaman is very helpful in terms of advising them where they can make their next stop. Okay, next slide. And then the shaman is a wonderful storyteller or myth maker. And this is how the great myths of history were passed down, was originally through the shamans. At those days, they didn't have a written language, so everything was on the oral transmission. And the wonderful stories that now have ended up as being cultural myths, not all of them, but many of them go back to the days of the shamans. They use symbols. A symbol is an image that has a deeper meaning. They might use metaphors. A metaphor is a series of images that have a deeper meaning. And that all forms into the narrative. Somebody might have a vision of a sun, S-U-N, and so the shaman can sort of help figure out the deeper meaning of that sun. Other people might have a vision of the sun rising and setting. Now that's a cycle. That's more of a metaphor. And those all can feed into the narrative. Yes, so shamans, among all other things, has to be masters of storytelling and metaphors. Next slide. So these symbols and metaphors help the shamans make sense of their internal processes, what's going on in their own body, their natural environment, the play of nature, especially animals and birds all around them, their interactions with other people, and their interactions with the spirit world. Yes, their interactions with other people, because the shaman often has to mediate among members of the tribe, not only families, but different clans, to bring people together for a common goal. But then they also interact with the spirit world. Sometimes they have to beg and plead for a greedy spirit to give back a person's soul. Sometimes they simply receive great wisdom and advice from spirits in the other world. Okay, next slide. From a psychological perspective, we can define myths as statements or stories that address existential human concerns, have behavioral consequences. Myths explain phenomena. They guide people through life transitions. They assign people their place in society, and they connect people with the spiritual realm. Those of you who've read the work of Joseph Campbell will recognize these functions of myth from his books and his lectures. And of course, it's thanks to Joseph Campbell who has restored the meaning of myth to its original term. Nowadays, of course, people think myth is a falsity. That's the popular jargon. And Campbell gave people an alternate way of looking at the word myth. Next slide. And these myths are often enacted in community bonding activities, rites, rituals, and ceremonies. These mythic performances reinforce belief systems, moral codes, and social and personal identities. A few years ago, I was invited to a potlatch in Western Canada one of the tribal chiefs had passed, and they had a full weekend, 3 days, of giving away stuff to members of his tribe and to visiting chiefs. It was quite spectacular. I was so lucky that I was invited. And what did they do during the day? They enacted myths. They dressed up in their traditional costumes, and they put on a different show every day. And the guy who was supervising this had a great repertoire of the myths of his tribe and memorable tribe to get things started. It was really very, very spectacular. Okay, next. Okay, so from psychology, oh my God, I'm way ahead of myself. Sorry, be patient. So, now we're going to talk about rituals. They are prescribed and stylized step-by-step performances of mythic themes. Rituals attempt to promise to promote social solidarity. They attempt to accompany life or cultural transitions. They attempt to reinforce a community's values, belief systems, and rules of conduct. Many examples. The Mazatecs have veladas, and the Mazatec veladas in central Mexico that had a repository of cultural myths and practices that were hidden by the Spaniards, mainly the use of the sacred mushroom. And when I visited Maria Sabina many, many years ago, she put on quite a show for us. And it was Maria Sabina that divulged the secret of the magic mushrooms to the Western world. Why? Because Jesus Christ came to her in a dream and said, you have to tell people that they can use these sacred mushrooms for their benefit. Well, as they say, the rest is history. The sacred mushroom now ended up as psilocybin, which, as you know, is being used successfully to treat serious depression and other maladies. And then there are the Huichol churches. The Huichols are a different tribe in Mexico on the far western part of the country, and they were so far removed from the mainstream that the Spaniards didn't track them down and abolish their sacred rituals. So Maria Sabina and her group simply went underground for a couple of hundred years. The Huichols didn't have to go underground because the Spaniards would never get to that dry and mountainous place, and there was no gold there anyway. So it's the Huichols who made use of peyote. And once a year, they would go on peyote hunts, and they would harvest the peyote, the buds of a little cactus plant, and then they would thank the plant for its gift. And then they would bring the peyote buds back for the ceremonies with their tribe. And then there are the ayahuasca visions. And the ayahuasca visions, as you well know, the term comes from the Amazon Valley in Brazil and the neighboring countries. And again, ayahuasca is a mixture of at least 2 different plants. And if they're put in the right mixture together, they produce visions and scenarios and hopefully profound wisdom. And when I was with the group in Brazil that used ayahuasca, I asked one of the Indians, you have to have a combination of these plants in just the right proportion for them to be effective. How did they find out? Plants told us. They told our ancestors. Well, that explanation is good as any. And so now, some of the ayahuasca-based churches have become legal in the United States, and so they're actually ayahuasca churches that one can go to if one passes the test for membership. Again, bringing something from the jungles of South America actually to the world, because there are ayahuasca churches in many places in Europe also. And then there is the pop collapser, which I just told you about. Oh my God, and Grateful Dead concerts. Many people say that the rock bands like the Grateful Dead and others serve a shamanic function, though they're not shamans themselves, but they produce music that alters people's consciousness and who give them some sort of solidarity as a tribe. So you can see some of the principles of shamanism playing out in some places in today's society. Okay, we've already defined myths, so we won't have to define that again. This is the older definition of myth. Now, an example of shamans, next slide, please. As scientists, is their manufacture of the complex mind-altering view ayahuasca, which goes by many, many other names, depending on the part of the Amazon where it's used. Jeremy Narby, an anthropologist, commented, here are people without electron microscopes who chose among 80,000 Amazonian plant species the leaves of a bush containing a brain hormone, which they combine with a vine containing substances that inactivate an enzyme of the digestive tract, which would otherwise block the effect. It is as if they knew about the molecular properties of plants and the art of combining them. So people often think of the tribal groups as being stupid savages, but not at all. And of course, you cannot romanticize tribal groups. You have to take them as they are because they have their faults too. But they have come up with some remarkable achievements over the years, like the work on ayahuasca. And if you look to the left-hand side of the screen, you will see one of Jeremy Narby's books, and you will see the double helix, which you all know from DNA chemistry, but that's very similar to the designs that the Amazonian shamans draw when they're asked to describe the effects of ayahuasca. It's just they knew in some way or another about the DNA double helix way before Westerners discovered it. So, next slide. Now, the medicines used by Native American shamans were often more effective than those used by European invaders. Stein estimated that 60% of the medicinal plants used by the Raponic tribe had unquestioned medicinal value. European medicines were far less useful. In a 1962 survey, the U.S. National Academy of Science reviewed the effectiveness of all medicines marked since 1938, finding evidence for their effectiveness for just 40%. And only half of that justified the claims of their manufacturers. And this is an important segment of what we know about shamanism, because when shamans work with a client or work with a community, they, without knowing it, were evoking placebo effects. And the harder a person believed in the ritual, the quicker they got well. The more the tribe believed in the ritual, the better off the tribe would be. And what about those people who were not too suggestible? They didn't get well, they died off, and their genes dropped out of the gene pool. So the placebo effect has a long history going back, of course, to the shamans. But not everything can be explained by the placebo effect. And that's why I wanted to emphasize the point that many of the medicines used by shamans really had some intrinsic benefits themselves. Okay, next. The placebo effect is a unique human adaptation. Daniel Dennett has described how it may have served adaptive purposes in human evolution. Because shamanic rituals and treatments made use of suggestion and imagination, early humans who responded surveyed those who not responded did not survive, and their genes dropped out of the gene pool. Brain scanning technologies identified the dorsal horn of the spinal cord as the most likely location of the placebo activity. This region processes sensory signals at the earliest stage of their input and could be a potential site for new treatments for pain and other ailments that are alleviated by placebo effects. Okay, next slide. Now, according to Nicholas Humphrey's economic research management hypothesis, the body conserves the resources, but expends them when survival is at stake, combating infection by fever, repelling toxins by vomiting, halting dangerous activities with pain signals. The placebo effect, according to this hypothesis, is releasing a trigger that tells the body to spare no expense in using available resources because there is hope for a cure. As a result, hope, faith, and exposition often makes the difference between life and death. Shamans knew how to utilize each of these factors, thus playing an important role in human evolution. And there you see a picture of a shaman beating a drum, because the drums are so central to many, many branches of shamanism. Okay, next slide. Now, I'm just going to briefly mention a couple of shamans I've known over the years. This is Wallace Black Elk, the great-grandnephew of the famous Black Elk of Black Elk Speaks, a book that was very important in terms of informing other Americans about the Native American legacy. Wallace Black Elk was very popular as a speaker and workshop leader. And his workshops were very unique. They happened over a weekend, often a natural setting. He had people go into the woods and find branches, twigs, leaves, etc., and build a wickiup right at the conference site. And then once they had built the wickiup, he would take people inside the wickiup for a sweat lodge ceremony. In the sweat lodge ceremony, people sit naked or virtually naked in a dome, and there's steam coming up from the fire inside the wickiup. And as people sweat and sweat and sweat, their impurities leave them. And then they come out of the sweat lodge, hopefully refreshed and illuminated. Okay, let's have the next one. Rolling thunder, I have mentioned before, and just to give you an idea of how shamanism utilizes basic psychological principles. I was with Rolling Thunder when he was still alive, working with a young Indian brave to combat his alcoholism. And Rolling Thunder wanted me to hypnotize him, which I did, and there was a support group of 50 members of the community around the fire. And I had him imagine that he was drinking alcohol and it tasted absolutely horrible. And then I had him substitute another beverage, and he suggested herbal tea. And so I told him how delicious that was. And I said, whenever you're tempted to have alcohol again, just think of the herbal tea and have that handy. Then Rolling Thunder took over for his part of the event, and he said to the group, I hope you all heard the owl hooting. Oh, they said, oh, yeah, yes, we did. Frankly, I didn't see an owl at all, but that's part of the shaman's way of using other people's imagination. And I hope you realize that the owl was hooting 9 times. Oh, yeah, we heard it 9 times. 9 is an unlucky number. It means that William here is going to have to get his act together. This is his last chance. Well, no, that's really heavy duty trip to lay on somebody, but it worked. Rolling Thunder then took an eagle feather and poked it around William's body, and whenever William jumped, Rolling Thunder would do what's called a cupping and sucking movement, and would suck the poisons out of his body, out of William's body, and spit them into a bucket. And yes, I saw the stuff that went into the bucket, probably tobacco juice, but it looked terrible. And then somebody went off and buried the poisons. And of course, burying was a good idea, that nobody could examine them and find out what really was happening. So he was a master showman, a master ritualist, and he would actually do a lot of healing with a very, very small amount of goods in preparation. But Rolling Thunder did some fairly spectacular things too. The Edgar Cayce Foundation of Virginia Beach had Rolling Thunder for a visit, and a woman brought her son, who was ailing, so badly ailing, bedridden, couldn't go to school. And Rolling Thunder had ordered 2 steaks. So he put the steak right next to the young boy's body. The young boy was on a mat, and then Rolling Thunder would do his cupping and sucking with the eagle feather. And once he was finished, people couldn't believe it. The steak was going up in smoke. So, of course, the steak then had to be taken off and burned. No trickery here. This was the real stuff. And that boy felt so well. The very next day, he was able to go to school for the first time in a year. And then the second young boy came, and Rolling Thunder worked and worked and worked. The steak didn't change. Rolling Thunder said, you know, that boy's mother is blocking my attempt. And that was true. The young boy's mother didn't want him to get well and go to school, then she'd be left alone. And so there are limits to a shaman's power. And sometimes a person's determination to block it really wins the day. So I've written 2 books about Rolling Thunder, which you can look up, and many, many stories like that. Okay, next slide. And this is Maria Sabina, who I mentioned a moment ago, who I met in Oaxaca, Mexico. I first heard about Maria Sabina by reading a Life magazine article called The Search for the Magic Mushroom. That was back in the 1970s, never realizing that some decades later I'd actually be able to pay her a visit. So here she is doing a floral cleansing of a member of our party. And she apologized. She was in her 90s, and she said, I just don't have the energy to lead you on a balada myself, but my student, Dona Clotilda, will do the honors. And so that night, our group all went to this little sanctuary to meet Dona Clotilda, and she explained, you know, this is the dry season. I don't have enough mushrooms for everybody. One of you will have to set it out. I said, oh, I've had the mushrooms myself. I'll be happy to set it out. And Samira said, well, good, you can be my assistant. Well, I learned more being her assistant than I would have learned taking the mushrooms. Just give you a couple of examples. She gave me a handful of candles and wanted me to stick them onto the floor, the concrete floor of her little sanctuary. And there were pine boughs all over the floor. And so I found a level place to drip the candle wax to stick the candle in. In the meantime, she was sticking candles in the right and left. I thought, why are they sticking to her so easily? And then I realized the candle that she was using had a flat bottom. The one she gave to me had a bumpy bottom. Of course, that made me look bad, and I didn't mind. I didn't mind at all. Part of her magic, part of her act. Now, why the pine boughs? Because some people were vomiting. And if they vomited, of course, that's a good sign, vomiting up the impurities and all of that. And the pine boughs hid the scent. Dona Clotilda told me to go and take care of a young man and young woman who were having problems. And so I knew who she was pointing to. I'd met them earlier. The young man was a concert pianist, and he had lost his ability because of stage fright. But after taking the magic mushrooms, he felt confident that he could now go and perform again. And indeed, that is actually what happened. The young woman was a former Miss Kentucky, and she had lived her life on her beauty. Now her beauty was fading. There was nothing inside. So the mushrooms gave her an impetus on how totally restructure her life and make her life meaningful without relying on her beauty. So anyway, the two of them were very, very happy, and they started kissing me, one on one cheek, one on the other cheek. Ordinarily, this would have been a fun experience, but the stench on their breath was nearly passed out. But that's what happens when you're a shaman's assistant. You don't know what they're getting into. Okay, next slide. And this is Kredamuta, one of the most famous shamans of the 20th century, along with Maria Sabina, of course. And I met him in South Africa, and he was very impressed that I knew Rolling Thunder. and he had a necklace with turquoise that a friend of Rolling Thunder's had given him. So it's interesting how these shamans sometimes know about each other over the miles, over the continent. But when I was with Credo Mutwa, it was the turn of the century, year 2000, and he threw the bones for the new century. Now, throwing the bones is a common shamanic practice in one form or another. The Zulu shamans have a set of 4 carved bones that they have retrieved from their initiation ceremonies, and you throw them. They're decorated on one side, not on the other side, and the combination will give you a clue as to what the answer is going to be to the question. And sure enough, when the bones were thrown and when Credo Mutwa was doing his singing and dancing and drumming, he's, well, I can see a day coming when there will be no discrimination in South Africa, and when some of the imprisoned leaders are released. And I thought, oh, good heavens, wishful thinking, wishful thinking. No, I was wrong. Within a few years, apartheid had disappeared from South Africa. Although it happened so quickly, it was hard to predict it. And some of the people who were taken out of jail assumed positions of high leadership. So, Credo Mutwa was such an interesting person, was had some interesting time together, that I could probably go on and talk for the next half hour about him alone. However, we have to move on. I want to allow us plenty of time for questions, or at least some time for questions. Okay, I think that's the end of the slides, right?
Thank you so much, Dr. Krippner. That was so very enlightening and insightful. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we're actually going to move on to the next speaker. I'm sure the audience has a lot of questions. Again, I kindly request you to send the questions in the chat so that I can forward them to Dr. Krippner, and we can have a discussion and get back to you with the answers in written form very soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for arranging this wonderful program.
Thank you so much for being a part of it. We're so very grateful, so very, very grateful.
I'm so sorry about the technology.
Oh, that's fine. Like I said,
But the show must go on.
Absolutely. You said it, Dr. Krippner. Thank
Yes.
you.